One huge mistake cost them nearly 50 ounces of gold. He had pushed himself too hard for too long, and finally his body just broke down. The machines kept running, but without Chris everything felt off. The crew tried to patch things up, but nothing ran the same way again. People, stop joking around. Tune in, because right after Chris walked away, the entire mine almost collapsed. The burden of 10,000 ounces. The Klondike doesn't hand out legends, it carves them out with endless hours, freezing cold, thick mud, and the quiet strength of pushing forward when everyone else wants to quit. Chris had been that person. Steady hands, calm voice, reliable results. He wasn't loud or showy. He wasn't dramatic. But he was the difference between scraping by and actually hitting real gold. For more than 10 years, he had been the quiet backbone of a chaotic operation that barely stayed together. But then he vanished, and nothing felt the same again. Water is our best friend and our worst enemy. If we can turn that pump down to reduce the water volume and stop washing all this gold out. But in season 15, something changed. Not in one loud explosion, but in 1,000 tiny cracks. Invisible fractures that quietly spread across a man's strength. The season started like so many others: early snowmelt, big dreams, huge stakes. Parker Schnabel came in swinging, full of ambition, locked onto a target that felt like a challenge to the universe itself. The number landed like a punch. It wasn't just ambitious, it was dangerous. It demanded every second, every person, every machine running at full throttle. And from day one, the numbers weren't adding up. This is usually where the material hits first and it catches the coarse gold. Usually it's one of the best mats. The first mat, but what I'm seeing is real fine gold. It's too much water. It's not letting the gold settle where it's supposed to. 3 wash plants meant 3 gold streams, 3 sluice boxes, 3 cleanups, and only 1 Chris. He had survived tough seasons before. He had worked through injuries, freezing temperatures, exhaustion. But this wasn't tough. This was impossible. Every plant had its own problems. Big Red choked on oversized rocks. Roxanne's conveyor screamed every few hours. Bob's plant overflowed like it hated being contained. Chris stood in the middle of it all, trying to hold everything together with nothing but muscle memory and quiet determination. People noticed, but not fast enough. The joke stopped first. Then the posture changed. His careful, measured movements became stiff, slower. Not sloppy, never that, just strained. Chris wasn't falling behind because he was weak. He was falling behind because no one else had ever been asked to carry this much weight for this long. Parker saw it, but he was chasing 10,000 ounces. And when you're chasing a number that big, you don't look at bruises, you look at ounces. It wasn't only the physical toll. It was the mental one. Every mistake meant lost money. Every second spent cleaning was a second not recovering. The tension stretched tight across every shovel, every cleanup tray, every soaked boot on the gold room floor. Testing out those 2 clamps that we did today was a good thing to do, but we need to make some decisions. Clocks ticking. The pressure kept climbing, but the crew stayed stretched thin. No one wanted to pull someone off a dozer or loader. They were already running short. Chris had to make it work. He always had. Eventually someone suggested a name: Tatiana Costa. A skilled operator, smart, focused, respected. She wasn't a beginner, but she had never worked in the gold room. Still, it was the only option left. Tatiana got the call. She would be trained step by step into the one space nobody else wanted to touch. She came in like a lifeline. But a lifeline isn't a rescue. Not when the water's already in your lungs. Chris tried, of course he did. He trained her. Showed her how to clean trays, how to pan properly, how to spot gold loss before it happened. But every lesson cost him more. Time. Energy. Sanity. The rocks didn't stop. The buckets didn't stop. And behind every tip, behind every piece of hard-earned knowledge he passed on, another piece of him cracked. Tatiana worked hard. She adapted quickly. But even two people weren't enough. Not when the whole system had been built around Chris doing the impossible, alone. For too long, she couldn't wear his shoes. She couldn't turn back his clock. The extra help came too late. The damage was already done. Chris never said it out loud. He didn't complain. He didn't point fingers. When he gets a whip and it goes crazy and somebody could actually get hurt by the thing. Think of a fire hose this big around, right? I mean, he didn't cry foul. He just carried it. Every failed hose. Every double shift. Every ounce short of quota, and then one day, without any big announcement, he set down his tools, took off his gloves, and stepped out of frame. In the hours that followed, the crew fumbled. Tatiana kept going, but the room didn't feel the same. It wasn't about skill, it was about gravity. Chris had been the center of that space. Without him, the walls didn't quite hold. Outside camp, the internet noticed. Forums lit up. Viewers started asking questions. Was he fired? Was he sick? Was there drama the show refused to show? The truth wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a plot twist. Chris Dummett was simply done. Done breaking himself for a number too big to respect. Done covering holes no one else would patch. Done grinding every day toward a goal that rewarded no one except the spreadsheet. The Klondike had taken its toll, and it didn't offer apologies. No one wanted to admit it, but everyone knew. The operation would keep moving. Machines would keep running. But it would never run the same. In the history of Gold Rush, plenty of faces came and went. But Chris wasn't just a face. He was the firewall between collapse and momentum. And in season 15, that firewall finally broke. One person left, and everyone acted like nothing changed. A machine with no heart. After Chris Dummett stepped away, the machines kept running, belts spun, buckets dropped, sluice boxes overflowed, but something was missing. The rhythm was still there, but the soul was gone. It was like watching a beast breathe after its heart had been ripped out. The gold still came in, but every ounce felt heavier, more expensive. Not in dollars, in spirit. Tatiana Costa took over. She gave it everything. She stood where Chris once stood. She swept the same trays, handled the same mud, tried to spot the gold where it liked to hide, but the gold room didn't care about effort. It demanded precision. It demanded obsession. And above all, it demanded consistency, the kind only Chris had mastered season after season through cold sweat and broken hours. The wash plants didn't wait. Big Red kept dumping dirt. Rock Sand kept screaming through the night. Bob's plant rumbled like a volcano chewing gravel. Every hour brought more pay dirt, more cleanup, more pressure, and Tatiana, despite her speed, her focus, her ability to adapt, was now the only one standing between chaos and recovery. It was déjà vu, only with a smaller buffer and far less margin for error. Mistakes started piling up. Not huge ones, but enough. A gold flake missed here. A tray cleaned too fast there. A sluice box cleared a bit late. The kind of thing Chris would have caught on instinct long before it caused real trouble, but instinct takes time, and time was what no one had left. Parker saw the reports. Numbers dipped slightly, just enough to itch at the back of his mind. He didn't panic. He didn't lash out. But he noticed. Everyone did. A few ounces lost per run doesn't scream disaster, until you multiply it by 10, then 50, then 100. Adjusted feed rate. Adjusted water. It was a lot of fun, but definitely a challenge, 'cause you're like wide open material, wide open water. Suddenly you're staring down the barrel of 10,000 ounces with a leak you can't plug. The team tried to adjust. Tyson stepped in. Mitch offered to take shifts. But none of them had Chris's rhythm. They could move dirt. They could run loaders. But the gold room wasn't just a cleanup station, it was a surgical theater. One wrong move and the money bled out onto the ground. Meanwhile, Tatiana was burning out fast. Not because she couldn't handle the pressure, because she was trying to fill shoes that had been molded over 10 years of trial by fire. She wasn't just fighting fatigue. She was fighting ghosts. Chris's presence lingered in every corner of that tent. The way he labeled trays. The way he stacked pans. Even the scent of the gloves he left behind. The ripple effects were subtle at first. A drop in recovery rates. A slower cleanup cycle. Longer shifts for Tatiana. Increased fuel costs from inefficient runs. But soon it became a pattern, and patterns are how operations rise or fall. By mid-season, the cracks were obvious. They were still pulling gold, but the momentum was shaky, like a wagon racing downhill with one wheel loose. You could ride it for now, but the crash was inevitable. Parker sat down with the numbers. He didn't see failure. Not yet. But he saw a risk. He saw the fine line between record-breaking and ruin. 10,000 ounces looked less like a goal and more like a mirage, always there, just out of reach, promising reward but delivering fatigue. Even the dirt felt different. Finer. Wetter. Harder to sort. The pay streaks weren't as consistent. The haul trucks kept overheating. Things that used to be manageable were suddenly massive. The crew started snapping at each other. Fatigue crept into every shift. Mistakes weren't rare, they were routine. And through it all, the gold room stood as a quiet reminder that ambition without support collapses, not in one loud boom, but in a series of small, unforgiving snaps. The equipment paid the price next. Roxanne's conveyor failed twice in 1 week. Bob's plant choked on a crushed boulder. Big Red's pumps needed constant repair. Maintenance lagged because Chris wasn't there to anticipate failure before it arrived. His absence wasn't just emotional, it was operational. In a world where time is gold, they were hemorrhaging both. Then came the weather. Rains hit harder than usual. Roads turned to soup. Pay dirt became paste. And still Parker refused to slow down. He saw the finish line. He saw 10,000. And he didn't care what broke as long as they crossed it, but everyone else cared. It's a tough call because it's a big pit that has to come out this year, but then the frost makes it extremely expensive. So, we pulled the pin on it. This cleanup will be the last one for a while. Mitch looked tired. Tyson barely spoke. Tatiana walked like she hadn't sat down in weeks. The gold room reeked of oil and effort, not hope. At one point they brought in a consultant, a technician, who reviewed the gold loss reports. He confirmed what they already suspected: recovery was off by nearly 7% since Chris left. That's not just math. That's hundreds of ounces. That's millions in potential revenue evaporating into the tailings pile. They tried to fix it. Better wash cycles. New separators. Extra eyes on the process. But they were putting tape on a dam. The damage wasn't technical. It was cultural. Chris hadn't just maintained equipment, he'd maintained morale. Without him, the operation felt hollow. Functional, yes. Profitable, maybe. But soulless, the thing that made it feel human was gone. That he didn't say it out loud, but he felt it. The machine had changed. And maybe it was too late to fix, because when a man like Chris walks away, what he takes isn't just skill. He takes rhythm. He takes intuition. He takes trust. Things you can't replace with training or tools. Things you only realize are missing when the system starts to slip. Losing him was hard. Staying without him broke things even more. The cost of staying, the price of leaving. By the final stretch of season 15, the Klondike didn't feel like a mine anymore. It felt like a wound, not a fresh cut, but something that had been reopened over and over, deeper each time. The dirt no longer promised reward. It demanded sacrifice. The gold wasn't glowing, it was growling. 0.9000 ounces. That's where they were. Close. Close enough to taste. Close enough to believe, but not close enough to rest, because resting meant slowing down. Slowing down meant risking it all. And nobody wanted to be the one who let up. Chris Dummett watched from the outside. He saw the numbers. Heard the stories. He knew what it felt like to hit the edge, to hang there, to look down and wonder how much farther it could go. The truth was simple. They were still chasing gold, but the gold was chasing something too. Blood. Time. Loyalty. Everything they couldn't afford to lose. The Klondike wasn't a goldfield anymore. It was a grinder. The crew kept their heads down. Parker still pushed. Tatiana still worked her hands raw. Tyson took fewer breaks. Mitch doubled up on shifts. Everyone tightened their grip on the goal, even as their fingers went numb, but the cracks kept spreading. And with every ounce that came out of the ground, something else was buried deeper. Trust. Balance. Memory. The gold room, once loud with laughter and routine, had gone silent. There was no time for jokes, no energy for banter. The trays came in, the gold came out, the work got done, but nothing about it felt alive. Discovery's cameras captured the movement, but not the meaning. Footage without context. Faces without feeling. Ounces being counted like numbers on a ledger instead of victories. Viewers could feel it. Ratings shifted. Fans commented. The heartbeat was gone, and Chris had been that soul. Not the biggest name. Not the face of the franchise. But the pulse that steadied the rush. Without him, the show felt like machinery, effective, but empty. Back on site, the countdown to 10,000 grew more intense. They were running out of time. The season's weather window was closing. Rain had come harder. The air was colder. The road was sludge. He needed those ounces, for the record, for pride, maybe even to prove he could survive losing someone like Chris, because every empire builder eventually loses a general. The question is, can they still win the war? By the final week, the crew was fractured, not in friendship, but in fuel. They had nothing left to give. Eyes hollow. Joints stiff. Arguments short. Laughs rare. Always dry gold outside, never inside. It lets off a poisonous gas and you will mess yourself up if you don't. Another cleanup showed a dip. A big one. Something had gone wrong. Gold loss, not a mechanical failure, a human one. A shift missed a tray. A sluice box was cleared early. Maybe a sensor went unchecked. Maybe someone's brain was fogged from lack of sleep. No one pointed fingers, but everyone felt the weight. It was the kind of mistake Chris would have caught blindfolded. It cost them nearly 50 ounces. That's not a dent. That's a crater. Nearly $250,000 gone in slurry, and worse, it happened near the finish line. That loss didn't just cost them ounces. It drained what little resolve they had left. From that moment on, the dig was quieter. Not by choice, by resignation. Parker didn't rage. He didn't blame anyone. But the look in his eyes shifted, a mix of realization and regret. The empire was holding, but barely. He turned to the maps, reran the numbers, recalculated the schedules. There was still a path to 10,000, but it required perfection. A level of discipline they hadn't reached since Chris left. The team snapped to attention for one final push. They rallied. Tatiana took double shifts. Tyson stopped sleeping. Mitch worked through meals. And Parker, he did what he always did. He aimed higher. Chris had always understood that. It's why he walked. Not because he didn't love the work, because he loved it too much to watch it turn into something hollow, and for Parker, that realization hit harder than the wind. Because leadership isn't just about targets. It's about tempo. Vibe. Vision. Chris had given them that. Not with speeches, with presence, with humor, with calm in the storm, and now that storm had no eye. Later, after the final cleanup, and long after the last camera had gone dark, Parker sat alone at the edge of camp. The ground beneath him, now chewed and scarred by weeks of relentless digging, didn't look victorious. It looked tired. The gold had been pulled. The goal met. But the celebration never arrived. What should have felt like triumph now carried the weight of something hollowed out from within. We have a neighbor. He approached me a few weeks ago and wanted to sell his property, and I've been in discussions with him about buying him out, and I just signed a deal today. He didn't speak. No crew gathered for toasts. No one clapped or cheered, because deep down they all knew, this wasn't a win. It was a reckoning. They had crossed the 10,000-ounce mark, but something vital had been lost in the process. The kind of loss that doesn't make noise, but still leaves everything quieter. Back at camp, the team packed up with the weary precision of people who had given more than they had to offer. Tatiana finally slept through the night without interruption. Tyson stopped flinching at the sound of pumps. Mitch kept his tools in hand longer than necessary, lingering near the trucks like he didn't want to admit it was over. No one said Chris's name out loud. Not because they had forgotten him, because it hurt to remember how essential he had been. Chris Dummett didn't return for a final cameo. He didn't explain himself in interviews or offer post-season reflections. He had nothing to prove, and nothing left to fix. That he let the footage speak for itself. Let the silence echo louder than any speech. In his absence, the crew began to grasp what they had taken for granted. Consistency. Calm. Competence wrapped in the unassuming presence of one man. Some legends carve their names into stone. Chris Dummett carved his into gravel, tray by tray, cleanup by cleanup, until the entire operation stood on habits he had shaped with calloused hands and quiet grit. And when he finally let go, it wasn't a fall. It was a release. The kind only a man who has given everything can make. With peace, did Parker shift his loyalty to his legacy by letting Chris Dummett fade into silence? Share your opinion in the comments. Like and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.